Okay, yeah, screw it. This will work. I apologize for all technical issues. So I am just going to do this to get everyone here. Mm, screw it. Artemis, if you wouldn't mind, please, not doing that. That would be phenomenal, and I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Move to the above. Okay, sweet, excellent. Whew. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, excellent. I got the mod. That's the most important one. Hi, Sam. I know this is probably not what AWC wanted me to do, but screw it. It's the only way that I know how. Uh, it wouldn't be a live stream without technical issues, huh? Okay, great, beautiful. Woo, okay, and we're only getting started 15 minutes late. This is fine. And Artemis is trying to eat my cord. Don't you dare. Okay. Okay. So no, it wouldn't be AWC without some of this nasty tech credits. Yes, we are writers. We are not tech support. We are not here for that. We are writers because we're the opposite of tech people. All right. Are you going to be my good luck charm against the tech goblins? Yes. Artemis will fight the tech goblins. Rawr. Okay. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to share what I have learned when it comes to writing diverse characters. And in each and every section, I'm going to open it up to about 10-ish minutes of questions before we move on. We should be able to end with the nice 15-ish minutes of Q&A afterwards. Everyone got it? Great. Okay, cool. Okay, so the idea of this live stream is pretty self explanatory. Sometimes, as an author, we feel as if we're in a little bit of a catch 22. We, as a society, are a lot more conscious about diversity. We want to see more of it, which is good, all good things. We want to learn more about it. So, of course, authors like myself, we want to put it into our stories. But if we're not from the groups we're portraying, then sometimes we get accused of cultural appropriation or hogging the spotlight from authors of those groups. So then we play it safe. We don't have any diversity in our stories. And then we get accused of whitewashing or sexism or otherwise lack of diversity. So the question becomes, how does an author include characters or cultures in their works, especially if those works are sci-fi or fantasy, because hi, that's what I do, without being boring, preachy, or getting canceled? Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I am not the single greatest authority on this matter, okay? I'm sure that there are plenty of people who are going to disagree with the stance that I take. It doesn't help that, in my opinion, the line between what a majority author can or should write and what they shouldn't is it's not so much a line as it is more of a very gray blurry area that moves and it changes from story to story, writer to writer, even year to year. So, that being said, this live stream is more of a this is my experience doing this. These are my educated and researched thoughts. I encourage you to continue to do more research, but at the end of the day, just start writing, honestly. Oh, look, seduce the books t-shirt. Actually, no, it's not. It's I am seduction resistant. The t-shirt that my roommates got me. We're all ace, so we all have one. Okay. So, if you're new here, hi, I am Chris. Christina also works. I'm best known as CM Alonji, the creator of the TikTok series Cafe Latte. I hit something I shouldn't have. Okay. Um, My debut novel, Citadel, a science fiction book, was nominated for the Minnesota Book Award. I lost to Emma Tour's Inkblood Sister Scribe, which is fine. And I've got a dark fantasy novel called The Witch Who Trades with Death, which comes out next year, specifically on March 11th. It's the first two, Cafe Latte and Citadel, that makes me at least somewhat qualified to talk about this subject. Citadel's main character, Olivia, is an autistic woman of color, and I am only one of those things. Cafe Latte has a wide range of characters: an Arab American pansexual Muslim, a biromantic asexual fairy, a trans vampire, an autistic black Buddhist witch, a teenage goblin with ADHD, a Jewish gender fluid dragon, a broke non binary baker. For context, I am a Buddhist. This is actually a Buddhist tattoo right here. I was raised Christian. I'm white, aromantic, asexual, cisgender woman. I am neurotypical, not autistic. I'm just damn good with Google. Able bodied. I grew up middle class, and I have yet to hear a serious complaint about any of the characters that I listed, even when I do make a mistake. So, how the hell does that happen? Well, simply put, it is a two-step process. Don't worry, everyone, if you're late. I was also late because tech issues, they suck. So, step number one is research. And then this gets broken down into two further steps, 1A and 1B. So, step 1A is real life research. So, when I was researching autism for Olivia, which, oh, yeah, I actually have the book cover. I just love this cover. This artist gets deserves every penny that they earned. So when I was researching autism for Olivia, I was starting from a fairly decent position, actually. I have a few autistic family members. I've dated at least one autistic person. I worked with several of them at that time at my current job. So I had a nice wide range of what this is medically and personally. But the saying is, if you've met a person with autism, you have met one person with autism. And that can honestly be said of any group. Excuse me. Uh, no, don't get rid of my skit. Okay. No group is a monolith. I'm going to be saying that a lot today. And it's important to remember that as you dive into real life research. So for Olivia, this was just basic. What is autism? Googling. What are various symptoms that I can give this character, and how would that affect her and this story? What is the history of the treatment of autistic people? What are some contemporary issues going on with this community? This type of research, I will be doing Q&As after at the end of this, as well as interrupting each section for questions, Janine. So don't worry about that. This type of question can be a rabbit hole and a half. You do not have to be an expert on the subject. All you have to do is be able to hold a conversation with an expert for at least 5 minutes and not sound like an idiot. For a whole novel, that is the bar. I will never claim to be an expert on autism ever, but I can talk to an autistic person and or someone who has studied autism for decades for a 5, maybe even 10-minute conversation, and I will make them believe that I am smarter than I actually am. It's great. That's all I need. For TikToks, I don't even go that far. Don't ask me about any Muslim holidays. I Google what I need to give Husnia her days off, and I make sure she is not drinking alcohol or eating pork. That's it. On the other hand, don't think that you have to incorporate everything you learn into your character or even the story as a whole. You are not writing a nonfiction book on autism or Islam or whatever. You are writing a character. For Husnia, the cafe's Muslim employee, whenever I'm doing research on Islam, say the hijab, the pork thing, ideas of sexuality and gender, I am not thinking, how do I feel about this? Or how am I going to incorporate these massive debatable issues in my cute little TikToks about fairies? No, I am thinking, what does Husnia think about this? How is she going to respond to these ideas or this conflict? Again, monoliths. They do not exist. And some people feel that Husnia's opinions are wrong. One of the biggest points of contention is the fact that she is a hijabi Muslim. So she's wearing the scarf, she's doing the prayer, she's going to the mosque, and also a proud pansexual. She's queer. She wears the pin and has talked openly about dating women. A lot of Muslims think that queerness is a sin. Many Christians feel the same, and it doesn't stop those queer people from existing. And there are groups on the internet floating around that are made up of religious queer people, and they share their stories of how they navigate that kind of world. When someone sends me a comment along the lines of, Husnia can't be pan, she's a devout Muslim, I ignore it because it's queerphobic. And the only reason a lot of these people ostensibly care about Muslim representation is because now they have the chance to be queerphobic. But I'm also pleased because she feels like a real person when she gets that reaction. A lot of what you learn will not be applicable to the story you're writing, and that's fine. One thing that I learned during Citadel's research is that in some parts of medieval Europe, autistic kids were thought to be changelings, that is, fairy children or elders swapped for a human's real child. Reasons why vary. In order to fix this, parents were encouraged to basically emotionally and physically abuse their child until the real kid returned, or rather, until the kid learned how to mask, to pretend to be allistic, not autistic. That was not applicable to Citadel. It's science fiction, not medieval. But that little fact got squirreled away in the back of my mind. And a few years later, I came up with Nicole, an autistic woman in the Cafe Latte universe who thought that maybe she was a changeling. That was her first on screen appearance. Uh, you'll also want to Yeah, you also want to research individual experiences. You can group experiences and histories like that are really great for like getting the broad sense, but what's a great bread and butter for authors is the individual experience, and that can be found on Reddit, Tumblr, Facebook groups, Quora. For the groups, make sure that they are open to allies, okay, as well as the people you're researching. You don't want to barge in on anyone's safe spaces. You want to be in the spaces that encourage education and questions. And you want to ask questions, even if they make you feel like an idiot because they're so basic. They have to be asked at some point. Shed the embarrassment and keep going. I looked up things like best and worst things of being autistic. What does a meltdown feel like? What does masking feel like? Should you mask at work, etc.? And I got a lot of great material that way. A lot of people had already asked those questions before, and several more had answered with their own personal experiences. And guys, as a writer, it's a gold mine. I love seeing that. If you do, however, have a question that has not already been answered, or you can't find an article or blog or social media post on it, ask those in those ally friendly groups. That is literally what they're there for. One thing that I posted was, hey, I'm an allistic author writing an autistic character in my sci fi story. What types of tropes are you guys sick of seeing? What would you like to see in that type of character instead? And you could bet your ass I got a lot of great feedback and strong opinions in the comments. So I'm going to shut up real quick and have some water and open the floor to like 5 to 10 minutes of questions in the comments. So plug them in the questions, plug them in the comments. I will answer those that are relevant, and then I will keep going. Oh yeah, I probably should have put in a trigger warning about the history of changeling. Sorry, Margaret. And yes, Margaret, ask and listen, always a good idea. That's what it boils down to. I like, yeah. Yep. Always good to hear from different perspectives. As I said in the beginning, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and that's true of pretty much any group. No group is a monolith. Really, a lot of religious fundamentalists don't like autistics either. That's well, I guess, because they want everyone to conform to them. Uh, best way to deal with conflicting opinions. So it depends on like I said, it depends on the story you're trying to tell and the character. When I have conflicting opinions in the Muslim world that Husnia might encounter, I don't ask how do I want this story to go? How do I feel about this? I ask how does Husnia, a mother of three, married, works at Cafe Latte, except not really. I'm not going to spoil it. how is she going to feel about this? Like when Halloween came around, Halloween is great. You get to dress up as costumes and all that stuff, but there's like some actual contention in the Muslim world, Muslim Americans who are just like, you should not celebrate Halloween. It's a pagan holiday, or it's, a Christian paganized holiday, except some people are just like, no, you're not worshiping anything. It's you're doing candy as long as you're staying hijabi in costume, you're fine. So there's like a whole debate going on. And so for Husnia, I was just like, okay, how is she was born and raised in the United States. How is she going to feel about this? Well, she's a pretty devout Muslim, so she might not want to do trick or treating herself, but she doesn't want to deprive her kids of the experience. So I did trick or canning in college. We went door to door, dressed up in costumes. We were all adults, and instead of asking for candy, we asked for canned goods donations, and money for food shelters. And I did a little video on TikTok asking online if that was an okay interpretation of that, by Muslim standards. Vast majority of people said yes, that works, and so that's what Husnia did in canon. Um, so when it comes to trying to reconcile conflicting emotions, you really can't sometimes. You can acknowledge that conflicting ideas exist. But at the end of the day, if your character is going to feel like a person, they are probably going to have to make a decision. Um, and you got to go with what your character would decide, even if it's different from what you would decide, because they're someone else. Uh, This is about when you're part of the minority community, but your editor, alpha, beta readers does not and actively tries to make your character story more normal. What should you do? Get a different editor slash alpha and beta readers. Yeah, if because I am going at it from the other way, being a woman, being a romantic asexual, being Buddhist. I personally have never run into that problem all that much. I must have really lucked out with editors and beta readers. Um, but if you can get a different Janine, get a different editor. If you can't, like if you're locked into a publishing contract, I would um try to be polite at first, try to gently say, um, I understand that you feel that this thing that my character does may alienate some readers, but this is what um, whatever it is that you're doing. This is what Buddhists, we'll say Buddhist. So that's what I am. But this is what, Nichiren Buddhists do morning and evening Gongyo every day if they can. At least we're supposed to. I don't always do my morning and evening prayers like I should. I'm a bad Buddhist. I'm sorry. Um, but yeah, but like, you're saying like this is what they do. This is an accurate representation of what this minority does. And if I goof on this, I'm liable to alienate those readers. So I'm trying to, educate the wider population about what Nichiren Buddhism is, and I'm trying to give them a unique fantasy sci-fi hero by having them pull on uh, Buddhist ideals rather than our what we're used to, the Abrahamic Christian ideals. Um, so that is what I would attempt to do. If you can get through to your editor like that, with your alpha and beta readers, you can just ignore that, honestly. Um, you're not beholden to them. Your editor, that's a slightly different story. Try to find a better editor. If you can't, try to reason with them and talk to them, um, and just let them know that, this is normal. Whatever your character is doing is normal for that group. And and this could offer a unique perspective on what is a beloved trope, stereo, or a story that you're trying to tell. What kind of resources do you look at for writing diverse characters? Do I use personal memoirs, nonfiction, or articles on the internet? Mostly articles on the internet because I'm lazy and I like Googling. Um, Personal memoirs, social media posts, um, nonfiction books every now and then because I'm a history buff. I'm black, but I have a bunch of white alpha and beta readers who want to strip out everything that makes it more readable. What should I do? Get yourself better alpha and beta readers, Margaret, please. Seriously. Um, Like, I'm not even kidding. If like, you can say, you can try to say, like, this character is black, this is what black people do. This is like the whole point of this character slash this story. And if they still don't get it, ditch them and find new alpha and beta readers. I'm not even kidding. Tips upon when you're part of the minority, blah blah blah. I already did that. Repost the cues. There's a few niches of Are we going to see more trans chimera in the Citadel sequel? There is actually going to be a transhuman who is a major character in the Citadel sequel, Sanctuary. You're going to love her. Surprised I haven't written Husnia talking to another Muslim who's on the more extreme side, but thinking about it, it's a bit of a delicate subject. It is, and as I'm not a Muslim, I try to like not talk. There is a line, and I do try to focus on the fact that this is a fairy. This is the cafe latte. You're coming here for the fairies and the dragons, and the witches and the supernatural element. I do want to throw in another Muslim character or two. Like we're going to be meeting her husband at some point. Um, but it takes a lot, and I don't want to put too much spotlight on Husnia because I'm depriving from Rathu and Drek and Nicole and everyone else. How do I write neurotypical characters? I'm really neurodivergent and don't understand how to do it. I'm neurotypical and I don't sometimes understand how to write neurotypical characters. Um, it's one of the things where it just kind of comes from practice, and I guess you could do it the the other way, where hey, I am neurodivergent. I'm trying to write a neurotypical character. What are you guys so tired of seeing of with neurotypical characters? What are some tropes you wish you didn't see? Um, Alpha and beta readers, and we'll be getting to that pretty soon. Do you enjoy an editor slash beta reader who can challenge your ideas? Yes, that's the whole reason I have them. Good question, Polluted Annan. If you do base a character on an in real life person, do you need or at least recommend a contract? No, you do not need, or don't even recommend a contract. Especially if it's a public figure, you don't need that. If it's a more personal person, like Yarn Granny and her husband Vet Grandpa are based on my own grandparents. A lot of their history, if my grandparents were to ever see that, would be like, oh yeah, no, that's us. Um, just more devoutly Christian versions than them. So you don't need that. Depending on how nastily you portray those characters and or kill them off, you might have some explaining to do. But so long as you're not using their real names or anything like that, you'll be fine. I know for many traditional publishers you do, but self-publishing, yeah, even for self-publishing. Is the power of your story based on the strength of your villain or evil environment? I focus more on characters. It's a mixture of both. Appreciate that. Thank you, LGK. Probably a rough draft question, but how do you make sure the info you're getting is reliable and not from harmful sources, i.e., coming from groups that masquerade as being helpful but causes harm instead? Miss Adveral, I'm probably mispronouncing that. That is an excellent question. How do you ensure that the research that you're doing is from reliable sources and not from harmful sources or coming from groups that masquerade as being helpful? To quote Uncle Iroh, paraphrase, I should say, you can't just rely on one source for wisdom. You need to pull from multiple sources. So, I don't, when I'm doing my research on, say, autism or Islam, I'm not just reading one article. I'm reading multiple across multiple sources. And if one is saying one thing while three others are saying the other thing, I know something's up. You can look at the groups that, like, Autism Speaks is the one that automatically comes to mind. They have a lot of articles about what autism is, and I don't read any of them because of the real autistic people that I've spoken to who have overwhelmingly said the harm that they cause and just the problems that they have perpetuated and all that jazz. So it's a little bit of just checking your sources. You can like if you see an Autism Speaks article that talks about what you're trying to portray, you can say, okay, well, let me just open up a new Google tab and check my source real quick. Like, Autism Speaks controversy is one thing you can look up, or Autism Speaks scandal, stuff like that. And if nothing comes up or very little comes up, then you're probably fine. But if you get article after article after article after article of saying, here's why autism speaks sucks, here's why they don't represent autistic people, here's all the things they have done, and and it's just all that jazz. Then it's like, okay, I can ignore everything that they say from now on, basically, and move on to other sources. Let's go with one more question. Shiloh the Whimsy. As someone who has schizoaffective disorder, I try to draw attention to mental health with my writing, but I'm not trying to scare people. How do you touch on dark subjects without horror? Hmm. I guess. Um, I guess it depends on, I know so little. I think schizo, is that supposed to be, I'm assuming that's short for schizophrenia. Um, I guess it can depend, like, if you change the tone of your story, like, if your character deals with vivid, horrifying hallucinations of, like, monsters a la aliens or whatever, um, but they're just chilling in the room, talking shit about SpongeBob SquarePants, you can describe how horrifying they look, but if they're, they're complaining to each other about how they want pancakes, or like they are, talking smack about celebrities and social media. You can humanize them or make them utterly ridiculous. Um, that's my immediate instinct with that. Um, so, like, and you can draw attention to, like, and the person having these hallucinations could be like, oh my god, I need to have my meds again, but I can't afford it because the stupid rates went up again, um or something like that. So I would recommend, like, if you be authentic with it, but the tone can be whatever you want, kind of regardless of the subject material. It would come across as more dark humor than humor, but you can honestly have a lot of fun with that. Um, or you can even have, like, like a wholesome thing where, like, it's a horrifying little monster goblin creature that the main character is hallucinating, but they're super supportive, a la Uncle Iroh, and just being like, "Oh, you broke up. That really sucks," as they're like oozing green pus or whatever down their face. You know what? You should get yourself some of the you should make yourself those favorite chocolate chip cookies that your mom makes you. You'll feel so much better. And then tomorrow, you're gonna realize that there are other fish in the sea and be totally fine. And just their like face is literally melting and being horrifying. Um, but so you can play around with that and have a lot of fun. Okay, I am going to move on to to the rest of what I had planned to speak. Um, Hold or retype your questions once I open it up to questions again. But now we're going to move on to step 1B, which is fictional research. That's what I call it. Um, and that is research into how your minority has been portrayed in media. Now, minority characters have existed in Western media for a very long time. It just hasn't been a very flattering look. You go back just a generation ago, you cringe at the portrayals of queer people, people of color, disabled people, women, etc. So you want to look into the most harmful tropes and stereotypes of whatever group you're writing. For queer people, that trope is the bury your gays. For women, it's fridging. People of color, black guy dies first, and or sassy spicy friend. Every group has their own list of harmful tropes. So you want to look into that on your own. Sorry, I just say I don't have time to list them all out here. However, I have noticed a common theme among all of these harmful tropes, and that is that their minority characters do not have their own narrative arc. Now, to elaborate on this, we've all heard of the Bechdel test. That is, two named women talk to each other in a story about something other than a man. It is the baseline feminist marker that's hit or miss, honestly. I mean, freaking Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey both passed despite being anti feminist trash, while Coco technically fails. A better test, which can be changed to your needs, is the Mako test, named after the female lead in Pacific Rim. To pass this test, you must have at least one woman character who has a narrative arc that does not revolve around a man. Swap out women for whatever minority you're writing and man for their corresponding majority. And if you manage to pass the test, you're probably fine, honestly. So, for an example, if you're writing an Asian character, make sure that their arc does not revolve around a white person. If it's a queer character, their arc cannot revolve around a cis het person. Disabled or neurodivergent must have arcs that do not revolve around able bodied or neurotypical characters, etc. Um, we see the failure of this test most clearly in characters who die, especially if their death is a narrative tool to get other characters into or along the plot. Now, killing characters for narrative purposes is great. I love doing that. It's beautiful. It's magical. Olivia's mom gets executed in chapter 3 of Citadel. Parents, mentors, the occasional love interest, they are very susceptible to death by author, and that is fine. You just you just got to be careful with it. Now, I am not saying don't kill off any minority characters ever, but they've got to have a damn good in story reason for dying. And it would help if you had at least one surviving character who is also, black, queer, disabled, whatever, because then at least you're not wiping all of them out and have the sole survivors be the conventionally attractive white cishet people. Monkey Boy, it's chapter 3, all right? It's not a spoiler. Another note on fiction research, try to find books in your genre written by the type of person you're trying to portray. Hold on. I'm got okay. No, stop. Okay. Oh, sorry. Try to find books in your genre written by the type of person you're trying to portray. So if you're writing a major black character in a sci-fi novel, read sci-fi books by black authors. My favorite is Nadia Corafor. She's amazing. I'm going to add that to the chat actually. She doesn't need me promoting her, but you should read her books. Um if you're writing a thriller with a queer detective, read thrillers and mysteries by queer authors. Sometimes you can't do that, especially for things like disabilities, autism, queerness. Those things are none of the public's business, and the authors have every right to keep those parts of their identities hidden from the public eye. That makes finding those types of authors, difficult. The fact that a bunch of white authors are pretending to be people of color to give their books about POCs more legitimacy or to have an easier time publishing also doesn't help. So, a better possibility might be finding or even joining book clubs that are run by or have a majority of the type of character you're writing. So, if you're writing a lesbian character, see if you can find a public queer book club. You might not be able to join, but you can probably find or ask for a list of books that they have already read and enjoyed. Read them and see if you can figure out why they like them so much. You can also do the opposite, ask them what books they hate or that they found really disappointing. That will also be an eye opener. Now, one complaint that a lot of people often have about diverse characters is that their diversity or identity is all they are. The female character's whole arc and identity is being a woman. The black character's whole deal is being black. Like that's their whole personality. Now, this problem is not nearly as widespread as some would have you believe, but it does happen, and it's usually because the author is leaning more on the diversity points than the actual character. They might even think that they don't need to develop a character because making them disabled is character enough, which is it's weird. Okay, so this stems from the belief that there is such a thing as a default human. Think about it. Our ears perk up when we hear that this media has women or queer people or people of color. But if the majority of the characters are cishet or cishet white men, that's considered normal. It's the default. We have a default state of being. Which is weird because when you look at it globally, Asian women are the biggest demographic in the world. If there's a default, that's it. And this idea changes from culture to culture, time period to time period. Whatever the default is, it's what we're most used to seeing and dealing with. If we change any of the settings, make him a man, make them queer, give them OCD, that already feels like changing something. So why would you bother writing anything else about their character? They're spicy enough. Nobody is any one thing. I am more than just a queer Buddhist woman, just as I'm more than an able bodied white person. Everyone has hobbies, music tastes, things we're good and bad at, a lot of which have nothing to do with our various identities, although it can play a role. Again, if your character passes the Makomori test, they're probably okay. But as you're doing this research, it's important to remember that this is a character, a person you're writing, not an archetype or a stereotype. Monoliths do not exist. I'm gonna get that tattooed onto me, I swear. Yes, LGK, the idea of a default is odd. It might do you good to be aware of certain assumptions or stereotypes that you and your audience may have regarding certain characters. For example, I'm a white woman, so that means I must love Taylor Swift, right? She's okay. I've got a couple of her songs in my playlist, but given a choice, I would rather listen to Tool. My mother, on the other hand, is way more into Swift, Beyonce, Britney Spears than I will ever be. Her music tastes are very basic white girl. So sure, you can have your black character love rap music and your Japanese character be a fan of sushi because sushi is delicious. As long as it's only a part of their entirety of their unique characters, you'll be fine. But making every black character a rapper or every Japanese character a sushi lover is liable to land you in stereotype land. Make one of your black characters a metalhead or have a Japanese character gorge on fajitas. Everyone likes different things, especially if the story takes place somewhere similar to America, where such cultural identities merge and crash into each other all the time. Now, so far, we've talked about if you're writing individual characters, one, two, three characters from groups that you are not a part of. But what if, as a sci fi fantasy author, you decide to write an entire culture based on one that you are not a part of? So that is, you're white, and you want to write a fantasy world that is based on sub Saharan Africa rather than Europe. Again, research, it will help. There are two major complaints about stories that do this poorly. The first is that they typically draw on stereotypes. Just don't do this. Fantasy Asia, we usually have opium problems and samurai. Fantasy Africa will either have everyone in mud huts or riding camels in the desert. Ancient fantasy civilizations will usually combine Egypt and Mesoamerica because pyramids. The writer will often really drive home the point of how exotic and sexy these cultures are. Move your mic away from your mouth. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. And if those cultures are not the story's main setting, but the place where one of the characters comes from, then that character will usually be a carbon cutout of what that society is supposed to idealize. I mean, how many times have we run into the magic samurai from Fantasy Asia obsessed with honor? Thank you, Nick. The other big complaint is that the author will boil whole countries and centuries worth of cultures into a single monolith, by which I mean the author goes, I want to base my world on East Asia. And so they pull from China and Japan and Taiwan and Korea and all those other very distinct nations and cultures into a single fictional nationality. This is a problem because those nations are already treated as basically the same thing by outsiders, usually white people. It's like saying, I based my fantasy world on Europe. That is, I used Victorian England, medieval Germany, and ancient Greece. They're all Europe, so it's all basically the same thing, right? My advice would be to narrow your real world research scope down to one, maybe two cultures for inspiration, but try to pull as much from your own imagination as possible. Dishonor, dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow. Yes, six cats. Um, so that's what I did with The Witcher Trades with Death, which comes out in March. A lot of food and the clothing of Pahuda, the town where we spend most of our time in, is based on ancient to medieval Nepal because they're in the mountains and it's freezing, and I needed to know how people have survived such terrains and climates. But the religion, the social and political structures, the magic, that was almost entirely pulled from my own head. A story that did this type of thing very well is, of course, the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. Written by a couple of white guys, they based every culture of their world on a different Asian culture. But they leaned more on the magic system that they built rather than real world history. So, Fire Nation is Imperial Japan, Earth Kingdom is Imperial China, most notably Ming and Qing dynasties. Air Nomads are Tibet, Water Tribe is pulled largely from the Inuit. But that's just the general nations. You get down to each individual city or region or even village, and they will each have their own distinct feel within that cultural identity. North and South poles are very different. Caldera City is different from the Painted Lady's polluted river town, is different from Hama's terrorized village, even though they're all Fire Nation. And the history and conflict of these nations, internally and with each other, are almost entirely fantasy, as are the religions and large chunks of culture of each one. The fact that the writers leaned on one distinct civilization for each of these nations really helps. And of course, the fact that each of the characters are unique, three-dimensional, and not just cardboard cutouts of fantasy Asia, or, not just fantasy, not just cardboard cutouts of Air Nomad or Fire Nation or whatever. That makes the execution damn near perfect, even with the guy obsessed with honor. So, yes, it obviously took a lot of research and many years, but man, was it so worth it. I'm gonna open it up to questions again while I hydrate. Rachel D. Adams, what about the use of religious titles in fictional cultures? I came from a D&D background and used some titles from that, like and have shaman from that, like shaman, as their healing and counseling leadership, for instance. But the title shaman, priest, etc. are used in actual religions. Interesting. I would say as long as you do your research on, like, what those words mean in the real world, in the real life, like, so, like, if your fantasy shamans do a similar role to what real life shamans have and continue to do today, you're probably fine. But if your fantasy shamans are playing a very different role compared to what they've done in the past, then we're getting a little off. Um, is adopted characters considered social I don't know what you mean by adopted characters, Caroline. If you mean just adopted into the family, I don't think that's considered social justice or diverse. How do you feel about author-made religions? I love them. I make them all the time. They're incredible. They're my bread and butter. They're like the first thing I come up with. Valhalla Erickson. As an aspiring Black author, I want to write a fantasy story that has an Asian main character, but how can I write an Asian main character without being offensive? So I just went through all the research that you have to do. If you want to start at the beginning of this video and work your way through. And then there's also getting, which we're going to get into, sensitivity readers. Recruit as many of those as possible from that minority um, to help you out, and that will be even better. Um, yeah, that's pretty much, that's the whole point of this video basically, is do your research, as much googling as possible, and then recruit as many sensitivity readers as possible. Um, how do you make sure you have diverse characters when you're part of the oppressive majority? I'm white and cisgender, so am I. Um, you just kind of go what feels naturally to your story, and again, research and sensitivity readers. How do you go about the research of characters like Nicole, Hisney, and Raythu for the urban fantasy setting with the real world accompanying the fantasy element? So do my real world research, and then I think, okay, here's how my magic system incorporates that. Here's how dragons merge in with that. So I do my world building thing a bit first. I've got the world already built for me. It's Earth. And then I throw on the magical layer on top of that. And then I think, okay, how do my individual characters, Nicole, Hisnan, Raythu, think about and interact with their parts of this world? It might be different from how I personally would do it because they are not me. Would a female arc that revolves around grief and the recovery of over a dead male still fall under the female arc revolving around male? That's a good one, Jennifer. So the question is, would a narrative arc, a woman's narrative arc that revolves around grief and the recovery of grief over the death of a male still fall under the female arc revolving around male, or is that a gray area? I would say it's a gray area because still centered kind of around a man, but at the same time, it's her grief and recovery journey. Um, and the thing is, we're so intertwined, like, people are so intertwined. Like if she's losing her husband or her son or her dad, like, I mean, we've all experienced grief. So I think if you focus on that, the more universal element, um, I think you'll be fine. I would say that that passes. Is Blackwing based on your Accidentally Kidnapped series? No, that is completely different. Don't look for Accidentally Kidnapped until like 2030 at the earliest. Talking about a character who has conflict with or go against the grateful adopted stereotype, given the fact that meh, blah blah blah. What is your process for writing your scripts for cafe skits? That's going to be a different video in the next week or so. If I'm writing a fantasy story with creatures that you don't really exist in real life, what resources would you recommend use so I don't accidentally use a racist innuendo? Um, Fantasy story with creatures that do not exist in real life. So I guess it would depend on the type of creatures. If you're, I mean, like I would do basic. If you're worried about accidentally using a racist slur or racist innuendo on a non-sentient creature, um, that's a weird one. I mean, I guess I would rely more on the sensitivity readers for that and just do some basic research on what racist stereotypes, tropes, name calling would be so I don't accidentally do that. Um, like especially if you're pulling from, say, creatures from a specific part of the world that you haven't been in, check to see if there have been any, like, monkeys. There's a history of people calling black people monkeys. Check to see if there's something similar to that with what you've got going on. Um, that's an odd one. I've never written in a big city fantasy setting when they've only ever a small town. Visit a big city just for a weekend, just to get the feel for it, and then throw in your fantasy um, magic system on top of that, and you'll be fine. Ba, ba, ba. I don't feel like essay in dark fantasy as that's a tired trope. Like, how can essay be incorporated in a tasteful way? Valhalla, that is something that I had to deal with in The Witch Who Trades with Death, because the main character, Kana, starts off being essentially a sex slave. She is concubine to an emperor, and she runs away. That's the catalyst is she gets out, and he's chasing after her throughout the entire book. Um, I would recommend you do a lot of research on from survivors of SA and DV. If at all possible, volunteer for a rape crisis center. That's what I did for about a year. And that will, because there is a history of, like, helping getting through that type of thing in using art to work through that trauma. So um it can be done. You just got to really do your research on that. All right, we are running low on time, so I'm going to get my laptop working so I can read the script that I prepared for you guys, and blitz through the rest of this so that way we can get back to, because I don't want to hog more time than AWC allotted for me, and I technically already have. So, on to step two, sensitivity readers. Even with all that research, you still might goof. So, before you send your manuscript to an editor, you got to send it to sensitivity readers. Now, what are sensitivity readers? Sensitivity readers are a type of beta reader. Now, what are they? When a company comes out with a new video game, they don't just drop it in the market, they get some volunteers to sample it and report any bugs or issues. The first wave is called alpha testers, the second wave is beta testers, all the way down the Greek alphabet. Beta readers are the same basic principle. You show them your working draft and they give you amateur feedback that's very valuable in gauging how the rest of the market will react to your story. Sensitivity readers are people who specialize in looking for specific minorities in stories, and they usually come from those minorities as well. So my sensitivity readers for Citadel included one of my autistic cousins who gave me really great feedback. I also grabbed several more total strangers online who were open and comfortable about talking about their autism and happily told me all the things that I got wrong in Citadel's earlier drafts, which was not a lot because I did damn good research. The more eyes you get on this, the better, because, say it with me now, no group is a monolith. Listen to all the feedback and incorporate what you can into your next draft. Obviously, you might not be able to please anyone. I already talked about that with some of the Q&As, the questions that came at me earlier. The curse of beta readers and feedback of all kinds is that some people will want like more action, while others will want less. Some people want faster pace, while others they say it should be slower, etc. What you're mostly looking for is feedback with common patterns. If more than one person is saying this is a problem, then you probably have a problem. If you ignore the feedback, then you have no one but yourself to blame for if and when you get called out. What's the point of asking all these people to take time out of their day to read your book, probably for free, if you're not going to listen to what they have to say? Something that comes to mind is that movie called Music by Sia. I never saw it, mostly because the reviews all agreed that it was really bad and offensive in its portrayal of autistic people. And Sia got really pissed when people pointed that out, saying that she did her research and got feedback from the autistic community, which apparently she did not listen to. The feedback might hurt, especially if you really goof up. Remember that it is not an attack on you personally. You are learning. Learning means mistakes and occasionally making a fool of yourself. The point of sensitivity readers is to limit the exposure of those mistakes. Would you rather have only 5 people know that you buried your gaze or the whole world? Now, before we move on to the final part, there is one more warning I want to give you, and I feel absolutely ridiculous doing it, but do not pretend to be part of a minority that you are not. We've already had 3 authors get exposed for that BS just this year. It is so dumb. If you're white, don't pretend to be a person of color. If you're cishet, don't pretend to be queer. I will reach through this camera and I will strangle you if I find out any of you did this, okay? Swear, all right? R.F. Kuang's Yellow Face was not a fucking how-to guide. My God. Okay, final part. Yeah, Rachel, I don't know. How to apologize if you goof. Now, even with all of that done, something might still slip through the cracks. It'll probably be something small if you followed steps 1 and 2, but it might still cause offense. So what do? You apologize. You learn from it. You do better next time. Usually, you can even laugh it off. When I first introduced Husnia, I remembered that hijabi girls covered their hair. So that's what I did for her first appearance for her job interview at Cafe Latte. I forgot that they also covered their arms. So the first skit with Husnia, which is still on the internet, has our girl in a t-shirt in public. It wasn't until somebody very politely pointed that out that I added the sweater to her outfit. It was embarrassing, sure, but it's also objectively hilarious. An even funnier example comes from Rick Riordan, the author of Percy Jackson. Last year, he was promoting one of his books, The Chalice of the Gods, which I have not read yet, no spoilers. One of the characters in that book is Ganymedes, Zeus's cupbearer slash boy toy, and Rick shared some character art of this very handsome, skinny young man hanging out in Olympus. He captioned it, "Meet Olympus's favorite himbo." Every single comment on that post was some variation of Rick, honey, that's a twink. Um, I will remind you that Rick is, as far as we know, white cishet male. He has written a ton of women, people of color, queer people, ADHD, and dyslexic people, all very well, and he still made that mistake. Now, on the flip side, if that is the worst mistake he ever makes, that is still A plus material. And again, it's objectively hilarious. The point is, as you research and write, you're going to create a community. And much of that community is likely to be made up the same demographics that you portray in your story. We are drawn to the stories that talk about people like us, after all. This means that if you have a question and you're not sure about something, you now have a ton of people that you can just ask. So long as it is an honest question coming from genuine ignorance, they're going to be more than happy to answer it or refer you to other people who can answer it. I have asked questions about Islam, Judaism, gender queerness, and several other things of my TikTok community because I needed to know for the stories that they want me to continue to tell. And not once have I ever been ashamed for it. The comment section of those questions is always a combination of the answer to the question, people who are commenting to boost the post so it reaches more people who can answer the question, and gratitude. So many people say, "Thank you for asking us directly as part of your research. It means a lot." This has the side effect of building up a lot of goodwill. So when I do make a minor mistake, we all laugh it off. We have an environment of education and compassion. And at the end of the day, that is the end goal of writing diverse characters. You do that, you've already won. So that's really what it comes down to. Research as much as you can, recruit as many sensitivity readers as you can, apologize where needed, and understand that you will never, ever be an expert on this subject. You will always be a student. Treat the entire experience as a student, and you'll be fine. That is literally all I have today. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. So throw them in the chat. Lay them on me. Artemis, Luna. Yeah, that's right. Cats are fighting. I will answer those that I can, but we are running low on time. And I do apologize for that. How do you write a mix of high and urban fantasy? So high fantasy is um I'm blanking out on high fantasy. Yeah, so high fantasy is like it's basically epic fantasy. It takes place in a totally other world. Urban fantasy takes place in our world. You're writing portal fantasy, bouncing back and forth between the two. Unless you mean urban fantasy as in it takes place in a city, in which case just made up fantasy city. How would a writer focus on LGBTQ characters, correctly write them while not being a part of that community to avoid being offensive? LGK, did you miss the entire video that I was doing? Um, you just do your research and you get a bunch of sensitivity readers. That's really the 1-2 punch. Am I doing okay? I'm doing fine. I just need to hydrate. What would I consider preachy? What should one avoid to not come across that way? So, one of the obviously stories can have morals and themes. Um, But one of the biggest ways to become a preachy book is when you're trying to have a statement on some sort of social issue, social ill, or whatever that has nothing to do with the story itself. Like if you're shoehorning in facts about sexual assault or sexual violence. Yes, we need to talk about that, but if that's not what the story is about, it's jarring and it comes across as preachy. Whereas Avatar: Last Airbender season 1, those final episodes, especially the waterbending master, was all about sexism and patriarchy and the problems therein. But it didn't feel preachy because throughout that entire season, we had been rooting for Katara. Watching her overcome various obstacles, and we also have Sokka being a sexist and overcoming his own sexism mostly throughout that first season. So having Katara, slam into a patriarchal, sexist waterbending master, um, when we have seen that and her brother and just that general vibe, it's a nice climax that and we're not thinking, "Oh, we have so many sexist and patriarchal problems in our society that we should look over." We don't think about that until later. What we're thinking in that moment is Katara kick his ass. So you kind of gotta blend it in with your story and its themes in order to make it not preachy. And someone's gonna call it preachy anyway. They're snowflakes. Ignore them. Um, where do I think is the best place to find information about diversity? It depends on the type of diversity you're trying to write. Um, I where I go to is honestly Facebook groups because that gives you access to the actual people that you're trying to portray. They will often post articles and videos better explaining and exploring topics that you might need to be aware of. And it just kind of pops up on your feed every now and then. So it's very casual and you just kind of absorb it through osmosis over time. To make sure I understand, when in doubt, ask about a character, do research, and ask sensitivity readers. Yes, Monkey Boy 03101. That is perfect. You understood the assignment. How do you find sensitivity readers? So, if you know any in real life, like if you're a white person and you have a black character and you have a black best friend, ask them. They might help. Um, Try to leave it out of like a coworker space, a professional setting. Like, if you're working alongside people in an office, avoid asking them. That can get a little dicey. Again, Facebook groups is honestly where I found most of my sensitivity readers here. Um, these days, obviously, I have enough of a pull that I can just drop it on TikTok and they will come. If you have a Patreon, you can do it that way. Um, but yeah, honestly, I did Facebook groups and it worked very well. Uh, let's see here. Are there sites that you would recommend to get sensitivity readers or people to run ideas by? Facebook groups. Um, Reddit might also be helpful. Any tips on minority, queer, etc. villains? So, minority characters have a long history of being relegated to villains. We got queer coded villains, which is like all of classic Disney. The Yellow Menace, Asian characters being villains. Black characters being villains. The thug, the terrorist, like they're already villains. Um, I would recommend having at least one person of the same minority being on team good guy, and you might still get an eyebrow, but, like, the fact of the matter is people are complicated and, just because you're a minority person, just because you're a woman or black or a Buddhist or queer, that doesn't mean you're an angel. Like, you can still absolutely be a villain. It's just yeah, if you have more of that type of minority in a wide range of morals, it's gonna be a lot it's gonna feel less like you're vilifying that minority status, if that makes sense. Aside yeah, aside from hyper protagonists, I've said groups. I mean, that might just be the only way to do that, honestly, Tahoe. Like, I'm sorry. Like, if you have 11 characters, one of them is a villain, and that one character is queer or POC, you're gonna get called out for vilifying that minority status. Make some of your protagonists part of said group. That's the easiest way, honestly. Last question. What should you do when dealing with creator burnout? You take a step back from creating. Um, if you're doing it professionally, you say to, your boss or to your audience, like, hey, I gotta step back. I can't, like, I've been doing this too much, I gotta look after my mental health. Most people will understand. Seriously, take a step back from it. If you get the creative itch to do something else, like, go with what brings you joy. Like, I was getting kind of burned out with Heart of Iron, which I just gave to my editor, by the way, the cafe latte book. I was so sick of looking at that, and now I still really want to create. I'm in burnout of Heart of Iron stuff, but now I really want to get into, like, Witcher Trace with Death, the Citadel sequel, other Kingdom of Starlight, even, like, all that stuff. But, sometimes you just kinda gotta not create at all and instead read or watch TV or watch YouTube videos or watch reruns or do whatever it is you gotta do. So just step back from creating and, you know, follow what your mind wants to eat, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm burning out a little bit. I'm going to end the stream right here. Thank you guys all for coming. Writer Sam Wicker is just linked the 2024 AWC playlist in the chat section. So be sure to check that out. There are a ton of other authors doing this today and yesterday and tomorrow. So be sure to check them out. Thank you all for showing up. You guys have a great day. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe. Do good choices. Be sure to pee after sex.